Hey up everyone. Super naked motorcycles, sports naked, street fighters, or whatever you want to call them, have always been a part of the motorcycle industry. Once they were the domain of the skilled, or often not so skilled, home mechanics. But over the years, the manufacturers picked up on the trend and some ran with it. Now, the market is flooded with bikes like the KTM 1290 and 1390 Superdukes, the Kawasaki Z1000, Yamaha MT01, Ducati Monster 1200 and Streetfighter V4, BMW's M1000R, MV Brutale 800 and the new Rush, as well as the updated Tuono V4. That means the market is flooded with naked bikes, so powerful they will rip your arms out of the sockets with the slightest twitch of the throttle, but many are just very expensive. Despite that, in the UK, sales of naked machines are now higher than that of fully fed sports bikes, and with all the performance and handling of a full-on superbike in a more comfortable, rider-friendly package, they have a lot of plus points. Today, I'm going to look at how you can get your hands on one of these blisteringly fast bikes without the need to sell your grandma or a kidney, because it is more than possible. You don't need to spend a fortune to get a great bike, as I have said so often. First, I will look at the evolution of the bikes. Then, at the end, I will go through some prices with you to show you how much it will actually cost you for bikes like those I've talked about. The first proper super naked will always be a contentious issue. I would say the Nighthawk SC was that bike, but you know I'm biased there. Looking back, bikes like the CBX and Z1300 show that there's always been a market for ultra-powerful UJMs, but they were big, heavy brutes. Later, high-power naked bikes became a whole different breed. The Ducati Monster 900 is generally accepted as the first of the modern breed of super nakeds. Motorcycles like the Nighthawk SC, the old CB 900F from '79, and even the VF 1100S Sabre might equally be given that title, but the difference really was the weight. At just 185 kilos or 408 pounds dry, the Ducati Monster 900 was over 50 kilos or 110 pounds lighter than the big Honda, and even the Nighthawk S was 30 kilos or 65 pounds heavier. Looking back to 1992 when it was first unveiled at the Cologne Motorcycle Show, there is no wonder it arrived with such a bang. Back then, if you wanted fast, it was a choice between a race replica and a giant behemoth, and the Monster 900 was neither of those things, but it was damn quick, especially through the twisties. It was light, agile, and on the roads it was a match for most of the sports bikes of the day, but it was comfortable to ride other than the fact you ended up with face ache from the stupid grin it left on your face every time you opened the throttle. The trellis chassis was proven. It had quality brakes and suspension, and then you got that thumping great air-cooled V-twin motor that just loved to be revved. It made the Monster live up to its name in a way that most bikes never do. They cut away everything that wasn't essential to keep it as light as possible, and with a short wheelbase and sharp geometry, it really was a scalpel of a bike. You could ride it to work every day, go scratching at the weekends, and even take on a track day or two, knowing the package was a match for most sports bikes. So that is the bike that marks the beginning today, the benchmark by which the rest will be judged. The success of the Monster was a shock for everyone, and a newly relaunched Triumph were the company that reacted fastest. They took the fairings off the Daytona to create the first Triumph Speed Triple. It was heavier than the Monster at 210 kilos or 463 pounds dry, and the spine frame of the first generation meant it was a top-heavy bike. But once moving, it handled well. It was more powerful than the Ducati, producing around 95 horsepower, but the real joy of this bike was that endless surge of mid-range power and the hypnotic sound of the big triple. It was seen as sportier than the Ducati by many, and it was more powerful and possibly a little faster, but where the Monster still won was with its sublime handling and the way it got its power down on the road. Suzuki were the first and really only one of the big four to react, and they crowbarred the proven 1157 air over oil cooled GSXR 1100 engine into a cheap, simple but well designed tubular steel chassis, and so the Bandit 1200 was born. Launched in 1996, the Suzuki Bandit 1200 was bomb-proof, and the slightly retuned engine had plenty of grunt as well as a screaming top end. It was more powerful than the Ducati and about equal with the Triumph, pushing out just under 100 horsepower stock. Where things changed was because the Bandit engine was so easy to tune and had massive potential power on tap for anyone who wanted to take it further. Even stock, it was quick, and although significantly heavier than the Ducati at 220 kilos or 485 pounds dry, the extra power made it a good match-up on the roads. On a track, you could watch the Ducati carry more corner speed, the Triumph fly out of the corners faster, and then the Suzuki would come on strong at the end of the straights. So there really wasn't much in it when it came to real-world performance. We got a semi-naked V-twin Suzuki the year after in the form of the Suzuki TL1000S, but it was never really a naked bike. It quickly gained a reputation for throwing riders into the air like a bucking bronco, and although it definitely achieved cult status, it was dropped quite quickly by Suzuki. The engine was a peach though, and after a spat with Ducati, Cagiva did a deal with Suzuki, and in 2000 put the growling 1000cc V-twin engine from the TL1000 into the Cagiva Raptor. The Cagiva Raptor was a direct attack on the market the Ducati Monster had carved up, and with 105 horsepower, 90 Newton meters of torque on tap, and a weight of 192 kilos or 423 pounds, it set a new benchmark. The Italian chassis and running gear tamed the unruly TL1000 engine, and the extra power meant the surge of acceleration you got from the Raptor was hard to beat. So maybe, arguably, but a new king was at the top. By then, Triumph had redesigned the speed triple around the new Triumph Daytona 955 engine and chassis. It was faster, lighter and more powerful in the new model, and was better in pretty much every way. But Ducati were determined to regain their crown at the top again, and in 2001 they released the first water-cooled S4 Monster. Power in the new Ducati Monster S4 was up to over 100 horsepower, torque of 92 Newton meters or 68 foot-pounds hit at 7,000 RPM, and although weight was up at 193 kilos or 425 pounds, it lived up to its name and was still arguably the best all-round package alongside the Cagiva Raptor. They both crossed the quarter-mile marker together at 11.1 seconds. But that was the closest to the 11-second quarter-mile barrier that any of these bikes had got to at the time. Other than Suzuki, the Japanese seemed bereft of ideas. With the R1 engine in their arsenal, Yamaha should have been at the cutting edge of this sector, but they weren't. Their best attempt was the Yamaha Fazer, which, although a great bike, just didn't have the precise handling that had begun to define this sector. Compared to the Monster and Triumph, it handled like a drunken hippo. They scrimped on the suspension and detuned the engine so much it was unrecognisable from the R1 engine. That made it a great sports tourer, but it would never break the super naked market. In 2002, Honda tried their hand, taking the 900 Fireblade engine and wrapping it in a simple cheap package to give us the Honda 900 Hornet. Again, this was a great bike and still has a serious cult following I'm about to upset, because as with the Yamaha, in my opinion, great as it was, the Hornet was just no match for the Ducati and Triumph. Stock, It was a match for the Bandit, but the GSXR engine was just so much easier to tune. In reality, even though I included the Bandit, none of the Japanese 4s ever quite gained that super naked status of the other bikes here. The bike that reset the bar again was unsurprisingly another Italian. The company was Aprilia, and the bike was the first generation of the 1000cc Rotax V-twin engined Aprilia Tuono 1000. You could say the Aprilia Tuono was the first genuine factory street fighter in many ways. There was no escaping the fact that this was simply a Millie with the bodywork taken off. The engine hadn't been detuned, and the suspension and running gear were as good as it gets. This bike had all the growl and bite of the Millie, but in a cut-back, bare-bones package. With 126 horsepower hitting at 9,500 RPM and over 100 Newton meters or 75 foot-pounds of arm-wrenching torque on tap at just over 7,000 RPM, this was a bike with muscle to spare, all in a package that weighed just 180 kilos or 396 pounds dry. That put it in a league of its own at the time. With a standing quarter mile that finally broke the 11-second barrier and a top speed of almost 157 miles an hour if you could hang on, it was streets ahead of everything else on the market. Even the TL1000 engine Cagiva Raptor couldn't compete. For the very first 100 lucky customers, there was a numbered special with a race chip. That motorcycle was dripping with titanium, magnesium, carbon and Kevlar, and then there were another 200 special Tuono Rs made, and they pushed the limit even further. The Tuono 1000 stayed at the top of the Aprilia range for the next 9 years, and by 2010 the Tuono Factory R was pushing out over 140 horsepower. It really had set a new benchmark, and that was a benchmark that few riders would ever explore. Getting the best from a Tuono Factory R took a special kind of rider, but in the hands of someone with the skill and balls to hit the throttle stop, there was nothing like it on the market. The fight was on, and it was the Italians who were dominating. They just seemed to get the fact that it was as much about the weight as the power. But next, the Austrians would try to crash the party. It was 2004 when the first real KTM Superduke was released. They had tried with the 950 Duke prototype, but it never really got anywhere. 2004 saw the release of the 998cc V-twin that is possibly one of the best incarnations of the LCA engine to leave the Matagoffin factory. 120 horsepower and 100 Newton meters or 74 foot-pounds of torque put it very close to the Tuono on power, and they had kept the weight down too. At 186 kilos or 410 pounds dry, it was almost a match. But the key word there is almost. It was still chasing the Tuono along with everyone else. By 2009, the Superduke R was up to 130 horsepower and had kept the weight the same, so the fight was much closer. By then, the Ducati S4R S was also up to 130 horsepower, and weight was back down to just 177 kilos or 390 pounds, making it the lightest monster so far, as long as you ticked all the boxes on the carbon in the extras list. Triumph had pushed the speed triple up to 1050cc, and power was up at 130 horsepower there too. More importantly, they had managed to cut the weight to 189 kilos or 416 pounds dry, so it was even closer to the heels of the Italians and Austrians now. With 3 different V-twins and a monstrous triple fighting it out at the top, the winner was hard to choose, but whichever one was the winner, it came from Europe, not Japan. All this time, none of the Japanese companies had really built anything to match the Europeans. To say they were late to the party is a bit of an understatement. It had been 18 years since the first Monster had been unveiled, and the best they had built other than the Bandit were overweight, detuned superbikes that were just no match for what had become known as the Super Nakeds. In 2008, Suzuki proved again that they hadn't got the memo about weight. They released the Suzuki B King, and by the time this naked Hayabusa made it to market, it produced 180 horsepower. But it had been hit by the ugly stick so many times that not even a mother could have loved it. It was a complete and utter flop, and Suzuki dropped it from the range even faster than it had appeared. Yamaha also missed the mark with the 2005 Yamaha MT01. It was a great bike, but it was just no match for the big V twins from Europe. MV Agusta joined the rest with the introduction of the Brutale, which took the prize as most exotic and expensive entry, and brands like the newly relaunched Moto Morini and even MZ joined the Super Naked Club. But it was in 2009 that Ducati pressed the reset button again. They launched the all-new 1098 Streetfighter, which joined the Monster in their range. The Ducati Streetfighter pushed power up to a claimed 155 horsepower. It was the first of a new breed of Super Nakeds and the dawn of another new era of performance. Not to be outdone, 2 years later in 2011, the new Aprilia Tuono V4 was launched. It became the most powerful Super Naked ever built, with 167 horsepower straight from the factory. Now, it was a simple fact that without the computerized jiggery-pokery they all came loaded with, all but the very best racers could get nowhere near the performance limit of these bikes. This is where the manufacturers lost their way again, in my opinion. Racing to make the most powerful bike in the sector is fine, but when that bike is so far beyond the skill set of the people buying them, it becomes pointless. Without the many bits of electronic wizardry they were packed with, they would all end up in a scrapyard very quickly. Is there really any point? All it became is a great big pissing contest, and I never got sucked in by the more is better marketing barrage. If I could have ridden a Gen 1 Tuono to its absolute limit, I would have been a very happy man, and probably racing at least at a national level. The idea of trying to get all the power of a Streetfighter V4 down on the tarmac is mind-boggling to me. I did have the terrifyingly exhilarating experience of doing a few laps around Cadwell Park on a V4 Panigale, which is obviously where the Streetfighter came from. Even with all the electronics on, it was a complete animal. It was far faster than I will ever be, and I was under no illusions about that when I rolled carefully and very humbly back into the paddock. Now we have all the Super Nakeds chasing ever more unusable power figures, and controlling them we have ever more complex and expensive electronic systems that have pushed prices higher and higher. Bikes like the KTM Superduke 1290 and now 1390, the BMW M1000R, Yamaha MT10 and others have become very expensive toys, and it is still the Ducati Monster 937 and the Aprilia Tuono V4 that lead the way. In my humble opinion, that is. They are the ones who have stayed more focused on weight. Choosing which is the best is a very personal thing. For those of us who focus on weight and agility more than absolute power, it is hard to see beyond Italy, and personally it is the earlier bikes with less electronics that will always draw my attention first. They are also, in my opinion, the ones that are more likely to become collector's bikes. I know some of you aren't in the UK, and I know prices will be different in different markets. But if you look hard, there will always be a bargain come along sooner or later. With any bike, look for the ones that haven't been messed about with too much. If aftermarket parts have been used, try to see if the originals are also available. Look for low numbers of previous owners, but you should especially look at how long the last owner had the bike. Someone who keeps a bike long term will tend to keep on top of the maintenance better. The reality is, few riders will have used these bikes to their limits, so it's more than possible to pick up a good quality used example for a decent price. You can get a hell of a lot of bike for your money if you search carefully. For some examples, I just looked at sold items on eBay to try and see what price bikes actually sold for, because you will see plenty with very hopeful asking prices that fool others in the market into thinking that is what the bikes are worth. Of the last 4 Ducati M900 Monsters that have sold, one very clean one-owner bike went for £4,500, but the other 3, which were all the best 1999 model, went for under £3,000. 2 of them for just £2,250. That sounds like a serious amount of bike for the money to me, and they were all in pretty good shape. With the Triumph Speed Triple, one 2005 Speed Triple 1050 recently sold for just £1,800. No, it wasn't pristine, but of the better ones, there was a 2010 Triumph Speed Triple 1050 in pristine condition that sold for £3,750. A 2016 Speed Triple 1050R sold for just £3,000, and there was even an old 1994 4-pot 1200 Speed 4 that sold for £2,650. Finding Suzuki Bandit 1200s that haven't been messed around with can be a little harder than you might think for a bike that sold so well. There was quite a tasteful 1997 Suzuki GSF 1200 Bandit Streetfighter that sold recently for £2,650, with probably at least £2,500 worth of performance parts on it. A genuine standard 2005 model sold for £2,700, and there were several that had sold for under £2,000 that looked pretty good bikes. The Cagiva Raptor is still an underappreciated bike. Parts can be a challenge at times, but the Raptor chapter of Cagiva owners will help and not try and rob you blind in general. One 25,000-mile example recently sold for just £1,550, ready to ride away, and the TL1000 engine will go on forever. Just think about that. Suzuki's big V-twin tuned for over 100 horsepower in an Italian chassis with great running gear for just £1,500. Whoever got that bike got a serious bargain. The only other one for sale recently was a 2005 16,000-mile Cagiva Extra Raptor that sold for £2,300. There were just 1,000 Extra Raptors ever made, and they came with better suspension and dripping with carbon fibre. The rear was raised in comparison to the standard Raptor, and along with the suspension changes it meant balance was pushed forward to give a more 50-50 balance front to rear. This meant the handling was even sharper, and is only really a bike for a seasoned rider. But it was a sublime ride. On to Ducati. One Ducati Monster S4 fixer-upper garage find recently sold for just £935. But for a decent running example, you would be looking at around £2,500 for a decent S4 and probably closer to £4,000 for a good S4R. Recent sales were a 2008 Monster S4R in mint condition that went for £4,000, a 2003 S4R with just 21,000 miles on it for £3,500, and a 2002 S4 that sold for just £2,400. With the Aprilia Tuono, a 2007 1000 factory R with just 7,663 miles on it went for £4,000. A 2008 standard Tuono 1000 sold at £3,500, and a 2009 standard model with a full Akrapovic exhaust system sold for £3,800. For me, possibly the nicest looking one was a standard first gen 2005 Tuono that went for just under £3,200 with 30,000 miles on the clock. so the Tuono is possibly the one holding its price better than most right now. With the newer Aprilia Tuono V4 and Ducati Streetfighter, obviously prices go up, but buying a good second-hand bike would be anything from about £7,000 and upwards, depending on the models and condition. But that is still one hell of a saving on new prices. The market now has bikes like the MT09 that have the same super naked appeal as the earlier models from Triumph and Ducati for significantly less money. They offer riders a package that is sub 200 kilos or 440 pounds wet and produces around 120 horsepower for a lot less money than the Italians or Yamaha's own MT10. And let's be real, most people will never use more power than that. A recent 2018 Yamaha MT09 sold for £4,300, but the prices can be all over the place at the minute here. Some have gone at below £3,000 for a 2015 bike, which is bonkers. But that is why it is worth watching and waiting. You may miss one bargain, but you might find a better one too. Which of these ballistic bikes would you have in your garage? And which have I missed that you think I should have included? What is your favourite super naked? Thanks as always for watching, and I look forward to hearing your comments, and I'll reply when I can. Try to remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and sharing the video anywhere you think people will be interested helps us a lot too. If you'd like to help us to stay truly independent, on the Ko-fi link in the description you can get access to a private group where I share videos I can't screen on YouTube. There are videos anyone can watch there, but you can also make a one-off donation or join our group of monthly subscribers for access to other videos that only the channel's patrons can see. Join us on Rumble too. There is some great content that I just can't share on YouTube. And don't forget, we make the best biker t-shirts. Hundreds of original designs on premium quality t-shirts and neck gaiters, all available worldwide. Links to the main website and the Redbubble shop are in the description. Have a great week, and always remember, keep your spanners close and your keys even closer. Ride free, everyone!